Anybody who's a startup founder knows that things don't always go to plan, especially if you're starting a technology company and your technology experience is just enough to be dangerous.
How did you get the idea for the whole thing?
CRM is a $52 billion industry. It's why enterprise companies spend upwards of $1 million a year to keep their contacts up to date. If you can't reach that customer and tell them about a new product or get them to cross-sell or get them to come back, you're going to lose them.
Let's say I'm a startup founder. What advice would you give me? What should I look out for?
You have to stay focused, because if you're trying to do too much at once, you're not going to do anything well.
Karen, hello, how's it going? Welcome to our show.
Hey Sven, great to see you. How are you?
Doing good. It's raining outside, as I can see here in Croatia. Is it the same in Connecticut?
No rain, a little cloudy. They're promising us sun, but it hasn't really felt much like spring yet here. I do love spring in Croatia, though. I hope it's beautiful there soon.
Yeah, it's probably going to get beautiful. I always like to, mention where our guests are, joining during the podcast. As I mentioned, before we started recording, we had a guy from New Zealand. Before we had somebody from London, Iceland. So we're jumping all over the world. And you're joining us from the US.
Right.
Yeah.
Near New York.
Yeah, New York. Yeah. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Contacts411. When I was doing my prep, I was quite curious, what 411 means, but then I remembered, if I'm not mistaken, that there's a phrase, what's the 411, which means what's the info. Is that right?
That's correct. That's exactly right. For people of a certain age, like me, before cell phones existed, you could dial on your phone from home, your landline 411, and you could say, oh, I want Karen Sallick, who lives, in Westport, Massachusetts, what's her phone number? And you could get that information. And it was called information. And so that's where that comes from. And then, the Gen X has sort of taken it over as what's the 411, because that doesn't really exist anymore now. With the internet, you can look stuff up and get little pieces of that. And so that's where the genesis of the name comes from.
So I was right.
You were right. You were exactly right.
Quite an interesting name. All right. So today we're going to, as I said, talk about contacts. How did you get the idea for the whole thing? You have, it's sort of a, helps you get or keep the contacts if you're in sales, if somebody moves to another company or something. But you started what, in marketing, if I'm not mistaken? So how did you actually get the idea for the whole thing?
Well, okay, so that's a long story. We could take up the whole time, but I won't do that. It's also best over a glass of wine, but we'll skip that too. So, the real issue is that, so what Contacts411 is an exclusively built for small business to update and enrich their customer contact data. And the whole point of that is, and where the idea comes from, is actually a long road. Contacts411 is sort of taken all the pieces of my business ever. And so while I didn't start in marketing, I ended up in marketing. I actually started out in investment banking in the 80s, if you can believe it, but ended up at a very high-end luxury retailer in New York City called Barney's New York. And there I was the director of strategic planning, and I was asked to go out and make sure that Barney's was doing something called target marketing better than anybody else. And that's because the concept and the term CRM actually hadn't been invented yet. It actually didn't exist, because this was in the late 80s. And so we built one of the earliest retail customer databases at Barney's. I ended up going to work for that company afterwards, creating retail CRM systems. And again, along that journey, CRM became actually a term. And we were working for enterprise companies. And then I started my own consulting firm in the late 90s, helping companies with their CRM programs, designing, choosing, creating marketing programs, loyalty programs. And we always, as a company, worked for both big corporations, global enterprise corporations, but we always had small businesses that we were working with. And the real issue every time was foundational to any CRM is up-to-date contact information on your customers, right? Because you can't market to somebody you can't reach. Right? You can have the best marketing program in the world, and if you can't reach that customer and tell them about a new product or get them to cross-sell or get them to come back in, you're going to lose them. And that's why CRM is a $52 billion industry. It's why enterprise companies spend upwards of $1 million a year to keep their contacts up to date. But small companies have never been able to do that. And so we would work with these small companies and we'd help them sort of build these databases, and they could never update their data. And then along the way, my co-founder, Barry Gold, who was working with me in the consulting company, came to me and said, I have this idea. There's all of these really high quality databases with, privacy compliant public record data, compiling all the contact information of people in the US, whether it's their personal address that's of public record or their business information. And big companies get to use it. But I think everybody should be able to get their contacts updated. And he said, and people are building apps. I think we should have an app. Do you want to invest? And I said, oh my God, Barry, brilliant. This is a brilliant idea. And yes, I want to invest, but 2 conditions. 1, I want to be your only investor. And 2, I want us to be co-founders because I see this need. I think it's a brilliant idea. And I think there's more to it. There's definitely an app that's really cool, but I know from experience, small business needs it too. So let's figure it out. And that's how Contacts411 started.
Right. It's quite interesting that you mentioned that CRM didn't exist as a thing before, because, let's say I take it for granted. I thought, well, how come it didn't? It's CRM, but it's quite interesting, that you mentioned that some things, and you mentioned targeted marketing, because, I'm a younger person. So, it's quite interesting to hear, that something like that didn't exist before. All right, so you got the idea, and then you mentioned that that you wanted to be the only investor at the beginning. So how did that go?
Interestingly, anybody who's a startup founder knows that things don't always go to plan, and so and especially if you're starting a technology company and your technology experience is just enough to be dangerous. So when I worked for Hart Hanks Data Technologies on these first ever sort of desktop customer database solutions, and I was the product person for the first ever actually selection tool called Desktop Direct. That was the first one that companies could use on a desktop to make selections and do, actually, you couldn't even do email back then. It was to run actual real direct marketing programs where you sent mail. So I had plenty of experience of working with developers and developing tools and making sure you really understood what the market wanted and the customers wanted and how do you implement that into a product. But I don't code. I'm not a technology person. I know, my DECODE team will tell you I know just enough to be dangerous. And so we made some early mistakes. We hired, a programmer here in the US who didn't have enough real back-end experience and on how to optimize how code went. He was more like an app person, but our product really needed a strong back end. The app was just sort of the icing on the cake, but the cake had to be baked really well, and it didn't get baked really well. We did some research and we talked to potential customers. So we had some pretty good ideas on the design, but then you get out there and all of a sudden you're like, okay, here we go. And one of the things we did was we let people update all of the contacts in their phone at once. Well, that was a mistake because 1, it tied up their phone forever. 2, cell service wasn't great. So if your cell service broke, it stopped. 3, once somebody updated their whole contacts, they didn't need to keep subscribing. So there were all these things that didn't work. We saw great traction. People got really excited. They bought it, they used it, but we had to pull it. After 4 months, we pulled it. And we took a good hard look at the code. And there were so many problems. And so we hired somebody to help us kind of evaluate it and then decide what we needed to do. And this guy named Jack Templin, he's a great guy, actually was working in Croatia with the development team that we were using before we went to DECODE, or recommended a team because that's who he was working with. And so we sort of said, all right, we're going to keep what code we can, some of the underlying code, and we're just going to scrap everything and start over. And that was, horrifying. But I also had, we were bootstrapping and I was running a consulting business. And at that point I said, you know what, I need to work in this business. And so I started, with 20% of my time and then 30% of my time, and, managing and being in the business helped a lot to get us to, a much better product and get the data sources we needed. Barry worked on that really hard, but also just to make sure that the product was doing what we wanted it to do.
Right. You are our client, we're not making a low-key sales pitch here, because all of the guests that we had now, we had 3 or 4 of them who had, the same background as you, non-technical person, started a company. And that's, it's quite difficult for them to understand what's happening, with all the tech and everything, So from what you said, I can imagine you have a lot of data to process, so your backend has to function very, very smoothly, and seamlessly. So how did you actually, why did you decide to come here? Why didn't you stay in the US with the vendors? Why did Europe attract your attention?
Well, there are a couple things, right? One, the easiest one is economics, right? So the cost per hour of programming first. The second is actually the quality and the experience. Really, I was really impressed. And actually, when we moved to DECODE, one of the reasons that we did was because there was already experience working with European addresses and apps that DECODE had developed that looked at addresses. And so there was a team that really understood that. And so when I was talking through with the co-founders and some potential folks who would be my team, what sort of sold me and what got me there was how do I say this well? It was sort of like, there was an understanding that just because I couldn't write code, I wasn't stupid. I really understood what the customer wanted. So I felt heard and respected and a part of the team. Prior to, everything was sort of happening in a black box and I didn't really know. What I loved about the process and my new team at DECODE was the engagement around, look, here, we know you want it to function this way. And yes, Karen, you're asking us to do this thing. However, the impact, if we do it that way that you're saying, on the user experience might not be great. Here are 2 other options that we think are better. Here's how we would program it. Here's how it'll actually work. What do you think? And what do you think is going to work better? And so that kind of back and forth and engagement and sort of trusting me that I really understood what the user experience needed to be like allowed me to trust the programmers that they had the user experience at heart when they were trying to program, not just like, how can I do this as quickly as possible with the fewest lines of code, and that's not to say that we didn't have hiccups along the way, but it was really the transparency and the openness and the collaboration was really helpful for me as somebody who is a non-technical founder, but again, like understands enough to know, just enough to drive the team a little crazy.
I think you have a pretty much similar story, to our previous guests that I mentioned, that are non-technical founders, because the most difficult thing for them, just to understand the technology. Or, as we had on one of our first episodes, we had a tech advisor who was trying to, put technical things, in terminology of a non-technical person, to help them understand, okay, we need to use this technology because XYZ, I don't know. Right now, you're going to have this many customers, so this technology is going to withstand, that many users. And I think, from my experience, from, filming and recording this show, a lot of non-technical founders have pretty much the same problem, understanding why they're doing this, in order, let's say to save money and time. Because if you use, let's say, the wrong technology or something else, you're going to lose a lot of money and a lot of time.
True.
Yeah. So
And
it's
then you
quite...
end up redoing it. It's terrible. Like you want to make sure you go from the beginning. It's interesting because I was that person in the CRM world, I was that person who helped the people at the company bridge the gap between the technical people building the tool, and I was that gap. So that I understood. But as soon as you move out of sort of database and data and that structure and move to whether it's an app or SaaS platform work, or a web app, so I knew what had to happen to the data and I knew what the user needed, but that technical piece, I didn't know.
Yeah, it can be quite scary. Both, we've had some case at our company here, when I was talking to some of the developers that, some of the non-tech founders that would work with certain companies, and 3, 4, 5 months would go by and there were no real, results or anything else, So when you actually, figured out, okay, we need to restructure something, so you started developing the MVP. How did that help you, to understand things better?
So that's a great question, Sen. I think our story is a little odd, maybe, or maybe it's common. I honestly, I don't know, because we started out with this app on the Apple platform, an iOS app, and the original vision was for it to be a B2C app first, and then we would make it available to Android and have kind of the app get some traction, and then we would build this small business platform. That was the plan. And we got ourselves all the way to an MVP where we were, enriching and updating contact data on the iPhone with business data and consumer data, one pass, split second, worked really well. We had rebranded to, into this logo and reskinned the whole app. So it was beautiful. And we were getting ready to fundraise. And as I was talking to customers to get those quotes, that you have to put in your pitch deck, you want, great stories in your pitch deck. Every single customer I spoke to said, love what you do in the app, but what I really need is, I have this small business. I've got a small database of customers associated with, name it, MailChimp, HubSpot, Klaviyo, Constant Contact, Sugar CRM, like name it. Everybody has a different tool. And there are so many of those CRM and email tools meant for small and medium-sized business. And they all said, I've got this customer data. I have no way to update it. This is what I really need. And at first I said to them, oh yeah, that's on the roadmap. We'll get there. And they would say, yeah, but that's what I need now. And so I went to some folks that I really trust in the SaaS space, in the VC space, and sort of said, what do you think about this? And everyone sort of said, look, that's the win. That's the play. And so right in that moment, we pivoted and we held the line on the app and we said, all right, we picked 10 customers with DECODE that sort of represented the kinds of industries we knew would need our product. And we went through a very rigorous business requirements, design. The DECODE team developed the flows and the screens with my team, and then we took it to our customer, these customers who agreed to develop with us and be our alpha testers. Reworked flows, reworked a whole bunch of stuff, get all those requirements down, and then we built the MVP version of the business platform, which is now, out in the market in beta, but is really this, it's more than an MVP at this point, because it's gotten a lot of customer feedback in it. But so now a customer can put in 50,000 customer contacts and update them and enrich them with business and consumer data. And because of, the programming, they can give it to us, update it. They do it themselves. They put it in, it gets updated and goes back in under an hour, 50,000 records. Sometimes, and if the internet is moving quickly and they've got good service, they can do it in under half an hour.
Wow. That's quite something, I didn't expect 50,000. That's quite a number. All right.
That was a real goal for us. And, we did a lot of stress tests in the DECODE team, what I said, like hiccups along the way. When something works with 5,000 records or, 3,000 records, that's one thing. But, to get it to work with 50 or 100,000 records and keep it safe and secure, that was a real challenge. And my team was really up to the task. Took us a little while, but and it wasn't a long while, but we got there.
What was again, I'm not making a low-key sales pitch. What was the thing that you liked about us when you worked with us with DECODE? Because, quite the last couple of months, our company has shifted to a really, product-minded company, which means, we're not going to be there only, to do the coding and that's it. We're going to be there, to help you with the business side also, just to see how can you develop your product even further, and if you discover another market niche, that you can fit in, maybe we can somehow help you out.
I would say there are several things. I mentioned transparency before. I think collaboration is also one of the most important things. Very early on in the process, once we had sort of gotten to all the requirements and talked to all the customers, I was really encouraged to actually travel to Zagreb and meet with the team. And that was actually probably the smartest thing ever to do, besides being amazing. And I'd never been to Croatia before. And oh my God, I can't wait to go back because it was just incredible. Sitting in the DECODE offices with my team and seeing that the programmers weren't just engineers who only understood coding, but who were real problem solvers and could, again, really hear what I was saying about customer experience. And we worked through kind of prioritizing, looking at what functionality we really wanted, what it was going to take to actually develop that functionality, and how important was that functionality versus the level of effort, and what load would that put on, and what was our guess on the ultimate user experience with or without these different functions. And that allowed us to take all of these different requirements and really create a product roadmap that allowed us to get to the alpha version, but then a real roadmap for how we were going to improve the product over time down the road, but making sure that the earliest part of what we were building and what the team was building would actually still be valid for that plan 3 years from now, 4 years from now. So that's probably one of my favorite things, was just that real, I almost want to say strategic thinking, which sounds like, that's not something programmers usually have, but I felt like the team really had that. And, each person had a different role, but together as a team, along with the Contacts411 team, it just worked really well. It was great.
I was curious about that because I always, when I'm talking to the guys from sales, they said that, they get a lot of inquiries about, I was working on this project for 3 months, but with previous vendor, but they didn't really help me out. They just, did the thing, but they weren't, I would say, product minded. They would just, as their CEO says, task doers, you just do your thing and that's it, 9 to 5, I'm done. I'm not going to think, anything else about the product. All right. So
Well, wait, you know what? Can I say something about that? Because I think this is important. The problem with that is if I say, oh, here's what needs to get done, and you're not curious about it and like how it fits, you're just going to program some code, and it may or may not actually work well, and it may or may not be valid going forward. But if you're curious about the why and how it fits and how to make it better and how to make sure that it has all the hooks for potential future things, that is what makes a better developer.
Right.
And yeah. And honestly, anytime we're developing sort of a new functionality that is in our back end area where, really need that security and the flow and speed, I can't imagine not using my team at DECODE.
Yeah. All right. After the MVP was developed, how did the market validation and the marketing strategy go?
So we're still in the middle of marketing strategy. So let me take market validation first, right? So I feel like we kind of went into it with a small amount of market validation based on, what potential users were telling us, plus my experience of 35 years in CRM and just knowing how foundational it is and it's a real need. So then what we started to do was with the alpha tests, our alpha testers were using it, actually loving it, and saying, wow, this marketing thing that I did went so much better because I had better data. My bounce rates went down. I got better deliverability. I made more sales. I made more donations. That was helpful. Then we got sort of confident enough to sort of put to be out there with the beta and start offering it to people. And where we saw some early traction was in the nonprofit space, actually, because they just had such a need to stay in touch with their donors. And so for us, the validation was every time we would get on the phone and we would do a demo, people would be like, oh my God, this exists. So what was interesting was we know there's a need. We knew there was a need. How that rolls into the marketing strategy is interesting, right? Because for the people where the pain point really exists and who live it every day, now they just have to know that this tool exists. Right? Because we're the first ever. So they don't know that the tool exists. The way they do it is they hire an intern. I have two kids who are not actually much younger than you, frankly, Sven. And they have both had jobs as interns where the whole summer, all they do was update the contacts in a company's CRM. Right? So finding those people who have those companies that have that pain point, that's important. I think we have a very traditional traction curve, right? So the innovators, the early adopters. So trying to find those people, it's really interesting because the need to have up-to-date contacts and have a complete contact where you've got an email, a phone number, and an address. Almost every business has that need. So it's not like I can say, oh, we're going after insurance companies, because that's who our product is for. Really, what we're going after are who's already subscribing to and paying money to market using MailChimp, to market using Klaviyo, who's using HubSpot, and can't afford these other solutions that update business. Like there are competitors to us. They do really only business data, and they're for medium and large size companies. They're really expensive. They start at like $25,000 a year. Our most expensive subscription is $3,100 a year because we really want to price it affordably for small business. So when we sort of think through how do we find those people, that gets really interesting, right? So one of the things that we're doing is we're using one of our own data vendors, our data suppliers, who's actually helping us enrich business data to identify and for us to do acquisition marketing directly to companies and individuals at companies who subscribe to the tools that I was just talking about. But we're also looking at other methods to see where we get traction. The other thing that we're doing that's sort of new, that is really exciting, is we use APIs for ourselves, right? To tap into these really high quality data sources that are our data partners. And that, again, these enterprise companies spend upwards of $500,000 to $1 million a year to license the data from. So we connect into them. And now we've actually started working with a couple of different companies where we're using our API for them to make their product better and more valuable for their customers, kind of behind the scenes too. So now we've kind of got two things, and it's like, okay, you got to stay focused, but the first thing you have to understand is where are you getting the best traction. So we're in the process right now of looking, of testing 3 or 4 areas of traction to see where we're going to get the best uptick. And then that's where we'll put our marketing efforts into for a little while.
Yeah, you really have to test everything out, just don't go head in first, because it's not, it might be, but I think in most of the case, it's not going to go good. Things might go south, if you don't test things out.
Well, and as a startup, you have absolutely limited funds, and especially in this market. I mean, fundraising is a nightmare right now for everybody. And so when it's so hard to come by funds, you've got to make sure that every single penny, not every single dollar, every single penny is counted and is, you understand, was it beneficial or wasn't it? And so, that's where I actually think my own personal background of developing measurable marketing programs for global companies helps me. But I have been accused by a few investors of thinking at scale and not as scrappy maybe as I should be. But I think, really understanding and making sure you measure everything, no matter what it is, especially on the marketing side, is critical.
So right now you have a mobile app and a web app. You had it at the beginning, but then you had to redevelop everything after the MVP, right?
Yeah. So the great thing about the web app and the way DECODE helped designed it is all of the back-end platform piece, because we had this plan eventually to get to the SaaS platform, the web app, where it wasn't just a one at a time lookup for a contact, but it was thousands and thousands, again, up to 50,000 or more at once, passing it. DECODE built for us that all the underlying code to handle that mostly, right? So when we went and started focusing on the platform, we stopped any enrichment and enhancement on that iOS app. And then eventually we really had to take a strong look at what we were doing, where we were spending our funds. And we knew we needed to do things on the iOS app. It needed, some more enhancements. It needed some bug fixes. And again, as a startup with limited funds, it's really important to focus. And so we knew that the business platform, that the SaaS platform was really the way to go. And so right now we've paused the ability for people to get our app in the iTunes store. It's shut down. If you already have the app, you can still use it, and actually people do every day. All the downloads that we had and the active users, we still have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of active users, but it's just sort of there and holding its own. We're really now, we've pivoted and are focused solely on the platform. And once we get that out there and running really well, and we've gotten the traction that we're happy about, and we've gotten more funding because we've got our ARRs at, a number that an investor wants to see, then in fact, when the time is right and it makes the most sense, we'll turn that app back on. But my guess is, because of the influence of the platform, that that iOS app is going to change a lot in terms of what it actually does. I think our ultimate vision is, not only could you do these one-off lookups, but you can actually manage what's on the desktop and the runs and those batch runs that you're doing from your phone. But we'll get there eventually.
Baby steps. Well, not baby steps, but don't take big steps, because that might be a bit dangerous. Just not, as I already mentioned, don't go head in first. Just
but also stay focused. You have to stay focused, because if you're trying to do too much at once, you're not going to do anything well.
True. I completely agree, because what happens sometimes not sometimes, but pretty much always, in startups, everybody's doing everything, and then you can lose focus. That's one of the main issues with startups. All right, so I can see the Contacts411 just behind your right shoulder, but that logo wasn't always the same. So you did a little bit of rebranding. Why did you do that, and how did that help you?
So great question. So yeah, our logo before this and our branding before this was very, oh God, I'm going to date myself, but IBM-esque. It was sort of blue and black, and it was a C with a 4-1, in blue with a 411 in it, and everything on the app itself and on our website was pretty bland, very kind of, I don't know, serious is the wrong word, but it was sleepy. It wasn't exciting. It wasn't engaging. And we were actually doing some test marketing with one of our partners, where we were testing acquisition, and we were having phenomenal open rates. So again, like market validation, we'd say, like, in the subject line of an acquisition email, frustrated by trying to update your contacts, and our open rates for a brand that nobody had ever heard of were insane, like 40, 50, 60% open rates, which is nuts. And so that is what went sort of towards market validation of the need. But when they got to sort of this, like, it wasn't exciting. People weren't converting, they weren't really going far. And we actually had this person at the company that we were working with say, I don't want to be mean, but honestly, this brand is so boring and you really need to rebrand. So I said, okay, we found a company to help us. I said to Decode, look, we are going to rebrand. And you guys were like, no problem. Like, we built it, so the skin is separate, no big deal. So we rebranded, did a whole new website, did all the skins. And at the time, DECODE actually didn't have a design group. And so we worked with a company in Bend, Oregon, who actually had a partner in London. I mean, the product is truly global, even though we only service US companies. But, and they redid everything. And because of how DECODE had actually designed it, reskinning everything was really pretty easy. And then by the time we got to the platform, DECODE had a design department. And so they took this new branding and put it through the platform. Honestly, I think they did a nice job, a really nice job. The one thing we haven't done yet, though, is, and we haven't actually unveiled it yet, but we did create a mascot, and it's a dog. So one of the cool things that we do is we call our process of finding the contact data, we call it a fetch. And so we have a dog as a mascot. His name is Scout, because he's scouting for your new data. And it's really fun. We've got animations where he's digging for his data, for your contact data, and pulling the contact data out of the ground for you. Really, because that's what it's like for somebody who doesn't have Contacts411. They have to dig and find it. And we're sort of saying, hey, we'll do that digging for you. Here's Scout. He's going to dig for you. I can't wait till we can actually get that built in so that, when somebody's waiting for us, the 10 minutes it takes us, to actually see Scout digging and have that happen. So I think the rebranding, people really like it. We've gotten some nice comments that it's super professional. But I think, as a CEO of a startup, knowing that rebranding can be done, and it's not going to mean I have to redevelop and redesign the whole product, was terrific.
Right. So, I mean, it's quite often that, companies rebrand themselves, and it might give you, let's say, it might shift your thinking a bit in a more, creative or in a different way so that you can bring extra value to the company.
Well, one of the things we were trying to do with this new logo is really get across the idea that we have so many points of connection in our lives, whether it's our personal lives or our business lives. So each of those little lines is really about a point of connection, and, bringing them all together and keeping those connections up to date and creating new ones. And so, what you can't see underneath that Contacts411 logo is it says creating connection. And that is the whole focus of the company. And now I feel like the logo really does get that across, that, we have all of these connections, and it's important to maintain those, not only personally, but also for our businesses so that they can be successful.
All right, Karen, I think that's pretty much it from my side. I don't know if there's anything more that you'd like to add, maybe some closing thoughts or something.
Oh gosh. One, thank you. This has been fun. I've enjoyed talking to you. I really have to say, DECODE has been an amazing partner for us, like through the thick and thin, and like the fun and the wins and the losses and the drama. But I know that I can always kind of pick up the phone and count on my team members, and just to just sort of be there. And if there's an emergency or a real issue, because it'll get taken care of. But also, I think there's something a little more, which is I feel like I have a great personal relationship with my team too. And for me, for some people, it doesn't matter, like it's business. But, at the core of Contacts411, right, is connection. And I think that that's been the best part of working with the DECODE team for us, is that connection. I know that the team and the founders at DECODE really care about us as a company and have our backs, and, and we care about them.
Any advice for future startup founders? What did you learn from your startup that let's say I'm a startup founder right now, and what advice would you give me? What should I look out for?
Oh my gosh.
A lot of things. A
whole separate hour. But I think really the three most important things are, whatever you think it's going to take in terms of financing to get your product to market, no matter what, it's not going to be that. Even with the best team, the best process, I'm a strategist by heart, and with all the best planning, things come up that you didn't anticipate. And so you need to really budget more. The other thing is I bootstrapped and self-funded for a while, and I waited too long to get outside funding. So really, it's great to self-fund as much as you can. That's a great thing if you can do that. But there are appropriate times where bringing in outside money makes sense. And then there are times where you are in your process where it's hard to do because you're sort of in a gray area. And that was a mistake I made. And so, really get advice about kind of what those points are for the industry that you're in and the technology that you're developing. And at each of those inflection points where it could be appropriate to bring in an investor, 3 or 4 months before, 5 months before, start to think about that and whether you are going to need to do that. The other thing is when people offer you more money and you only take a small amount, don't do that. Take what they offer you. I made that mistake twice, thinking, oh, it wasn't that hard to raise that money, and I don't want to give away that much equity. And in hindsight, because of what happened to the market, and those are things you can't control, I wish I had taken that extra money.
Right. So money's one of the things, that companies need just to function. And if you run out, things are gonna get a bit difficult. All right. So yeah, just a bit.
I also sort of feel like the other thing is if you don't really love what you do, if you don't totally believe in what you're doing and like don't wake up every morning being like, oh my God, this is such a great product. I love what I'm doing. Go do something else, because as a founder, it's so freaking hard that if you don't have that level of passion so that you can have the tenacity, don't do it.
Yeah, you need to have an emotional connection in some way to your product. Even though it's not a person, but because it's something that you should love, and that should bring you joy as an entrepreneur, and just at the end, it should help other people, in that whatever we're talking about, in every way. All right, Karen, thank you very much for being the guest on our show, and good luck with the contacts. I hope everything goes well. I hope the whole US uses your product, and I hope I'll see you again on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been really fun, and yeah, we hope that too. So, but have a great rest of your day, and thanks again. This is really fun.
See ya.